stuck in the mold house in winter, enduring naked hostility and aggression from the landlord. He didn't want to pay for filing fees if intimidation, harassment, and threats could work too. Sometimes you could see it in his eyes. You could see the gears turning, the, "Oh, come on," frustration, and I should at least be able to get away with a little something. Sometimes the most important victories look like failure from the outside. We were still going to have an eviction on our record. Our renter's insurance didn't cover mold, and most everything we owned was destroyed by mold. But we didn't sign any of the documents we were pressured to sign. One where we say there wasn't any mold after all, another where any mold in the apartment was caused by us, and there were a few different ways he tried to trick us into forfeiting our ability to take any future legal action against him. We really couldn't leave until we had a clear exit. We had to patiently wait while the mold was killing us, sticking to a rigid defensive game to a conclusion we found acceptable. Walking down the steps and past on his back porch, smoking a Marlboro menthol, I tightened my grip on the brass-plated metal knuckles concealed by my mitten. I didn't lower my head. I keep my eyes to the right of him and relax, unfocus my gaze. I get to the bottom of the steps, go around him, and just keep moving. I know he said something, hoping I'd react, but I just keep moving to the garage, to my car. Probably gonna have to cross paths with him again on my way back. We had no choice but to live, work, study, etc., while minimizing exposure to an extreme mold bloom that had grown beneath anyone's awareness, had been walled over, painted over, covered up. But some was there, all along, right out in the open. But the average tenant doesn't know what to look for, and has every reason not to go looking for it, or acknowledge it if they found it. The physical sickness, when exposed all at once to a high concentration of spores, was death-like. It included debilitating fatigue that sapped a person of energy, difficulty staying alert, a need to rest and sleep to an abnormal and distressing extent. Mental fog that impaired a person's ability to think and process information and emotions as they would be normally. Words would go missing while talking. Information and details of what happened that day would go missing while that was the topic being discussed. I'd lose track of what I was doing. I'd lose track of time, being off task for several hours at a time, unaware that any time had gone by. Debilitating and sudden nausea that would literally put a person on their ass and unable to move for an hour or even the better part of a day. Hallucinations that are intrusive and unexpected, disturbing and distressing and disorienting, and the nature of prolonged exposure meant that it varied in intensity but was persistent even when away from the house and not being currently exposed. It was much like the effects of psilocybin minus 90% of the desirable and pleasurable effects. Closed-eye visuals can be like tricolor LSD-like, or fractal, geometric, or plant-like patterns and structures that unfold and expand. Faces, morphing, usually a series of many faces, not strictly human, never predictably one species, never predictably benign, menacing, happy, sad, angry, afraid, never predictably easy to accept when it's happening. Sometimes they're intrusive and unwanted, nausea-inducing, and deeply disgusting. Sometimes they're on the attack and aggressive, panic and fear-inducing. And then there was the awareness of all living things and the sensitivity to how everything interacts, and it leads to a larger awareness of the need for myself, or whomever the case may be, to act with consideration and respect to all living things they occupy space with, to learn about them and better understand, so much that, as humans, we're programmed to set aside and not think about. Communication, which I would not describe as telepathic, but something like that begins to occur and becomes more frequent. I cannot say with scientific logical certainty that perceived reciprocal acknowledgement or communication in the way it is commonly thought of, or as it is between humans, takes place. But to learn one another's intentions, their behaviors, their nature, what offends them and what's fine, what would cause them to attack and how they would attack, and how to avoid unnecessary confrontation or injury, to seek harmony in an area with all who are one's cohabitants. Aren't these the reasons for communication? Very little communication is verbal. Most occurs through empathy and actions and corresponding observation and actions and patterns in others' behavior over time, whether we're talking about humans or any other living being. And it says, you need to leave this place. You're going to die here. The mold house, or death house, was, in a way, a special, if not sacred place. It was a place that had, up until this point, been a space people had lived. Superficial details had been maintained much longer than anything else, but now the deadly fungus had reclaimed it. All it took was a dramatic rise in moisture to cause a mold bloom that burst from the walls, from the floors and ceilings. Details that had been overlooked were now obvious, like the crack in the foundation. One wall in the basement always had a trickle, and there was always a puddle nearby. The white residue that coated the walls of the garage, like the residue that rock salt leaves behind, but everywhere. The creeping tier cobwebs that hung in doorways, the dirt lawn with the dug-up brick pathway and scattered bricks, and the building's history, how it had been abandoned for years, and during that time the roof had caved in before it was bought and renovated on the cheap in order to be a rental property. The change had happened. Humans were no longer welcome. The landlord wouldn't just let us leave. Instead, he punished us for letting him know that there was a problem and kept us there through intimidation and harassment. We had to stand our ground in 2 eviction hearings before we had anything resembling an opportunity to evacuate.